If the workers are more likely to be safe, if they're less likely to die, if they're more likely to have health care, if they're less likely to be on public assistance, it is just intuitive that the build quality is going to be better.
Let's play this clip about project labor agreements.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
President Biden has said that he intends to be the most pro-union president in history, has pursued policies that benefit union workers, which is fine, except they're to the detriment of all other workers in some cases. For example, through regulations on federal procurement and provisions in federally assisted grant programs, the administration has promoted project labor agreements on construction projects. PLAs limit the pool of qualified bidders to unionized contractors and union labor, which increases costs anytime.
He worded that really sneakily, I think. He said that it limits the pool of qualified contractors to union contractors and union labor. And I guess technically you could say that, but there is nothing in project labor agreements that stop non-union contractors from meeting those qualifications, right, other than the greed and avarice of the non-union contractors, right? There's nothing in these project labor agreements that says, yea, verily, you must be a union contractor, you must employ union members. Instead, the qualifications are you have to uphold these certain standards. The standards being, you have to pay people a certain amount, you have to have these certain safety conditions, you have to have this certain amount of training, blah, blah, blah. Nothing stopping non-union contractors from meeting those qualifications other than their greed and avarice.
You're decreasing supply, you're going to see higher costs, but it also limits job opportunities for non-union construction workers. You, Acting Secretary, have an obligation to support all American workers, regardless of their labor affiliation. Will you commit to opposing these exclusionary policies that harm the 88.3% of construction workers who choose not to join a union?
I certainly,
Before we even get to that, I just have to say that's also slippery language to say that 88% of construction workers choose not to join a union.
Right. Yeah, how many of those folks actually got to vote on a union?
Right. How many of those have ever been presented with an option?
Right.
If you were to poll that 88%, how many would be interested in a union were one available for them? I suspect quite a few of those 88% of construction workers would be interested in joining a union. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Congressman, commit to supporting and serving workers regardless of their union affiliation.
Will you support to not implementing project labor agreements on any federal projects?
Well, I think that some of those project labor agreements are written into statute, into the bipartisan infrastructure law that, again, was passed by Congress. I see my job as having full fidelity to the law as this body passes them, the law as courts interpret them. I think there's also studies that demonstrate that project labor agreements actually decrease costs over time because it assures a reliable workforce that is trained and that the outcome, fewer disruptions, that the outcomes are more reliable.
I think the studies show just the opposite.
That's actually really funny that they included her response to that because in two ways she really, just in like 30 seconds, destroyed, as other YouTube commentators would say in their titles, really destroyed his argument because she was like, okay, so for one, my job is not to, create laws, it's to execute the laws. And actually the law that we're talking about here, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the law requires, not, my feelings or anything, is the law requires that. The law has that. And so I have to execute that by virtue of my office. And actually it would be illegal for me not to. And so in effect, what this guy is doing is asking her to violate the law to the benefit of who? right? To the benefit of who? I think it would be interesting to see how much money he's gotten from the ABC, from the Associated Builders and Contractors. If anybody wants to, look that up and throw that in the chat or in our comment section, that would be something that would be interesting. The fellow was Representative Smucker from Pennsylvania, and Associated Builders and Contractors are a non-union construction alliance or whatever. Right. And so, she points out that actually what you're asking me to do is in many cases illegal. So that's one. But also there are many studies, in fact. He said he disputes this at the end, but there are in fact many studies that do show that project labor agreements decrease costs over the term of the contract. And that is true. That is just a factual statement. He says that the studies show the opposite, and it is also true that there are studies that show the opposite, but it is true that there are studies that show that project labor agreements cut costs. So there are studies on either side of the question, and to really kind of arrive at the truth, you'd have to do pretty nitty-gritty analysis of the studies and see what makes the most sense, and take a look at the methodology and all that. But for my buck, for my opinion, I think it's worth considering. Okay, what would we want to do as a society if it bore out that in fact project labor agreements do increase construction costs by 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or even 10%? What would we want to do then? And we would have to assess other stuff, and some of the other stuff is much less ambiguous and is much more clear. And the other stuff is that is the safety record, is the quality of life for union workers, for for people who work on construction projects that have project labor agreements, for their health, their health care, the amount and whether they are on public assistance, whether they are on welfare, right? These are all other things to consider than whether or not that one number big or small. And those questions are much more clear. I am not aware of any studies that show that non-project labor agreement contracts are safer. I'm not aware of any indication that would be true. I'm not aware of any indication that workers on non-PLA projects are less likely to be on public assistance. I am not aware of any data to suggest that workers on non-PLA projects are more likely to have health care or more likely to have better health care. There's just no reason to believe any of this is true. And so I'm also not aware of anything suggesting that the quality of the build by non-PLA projects is better. Right, because there's another question as to the price of the contract of the construction. Are we cutting the quality while we're cutting the price? And we know that as consumers, that this is true in a lot of situations. Just as a a normal kind of civilian consumer, if you pay more for something, it is more likely to be of better quality. And so there is reason to believe that that's the case for construction projects, right? And it also makes intuitive sense. If the workers are more likely to be safe, if they're less likely to die, if they're more likely to have health care, if they're less likely to be on public assistance, all of these things, it is just intuitive that the build quality is going to be better. And so, the question of one number, price of the contract, big or small, big number or small number, that's not the only question to consider. And for me, even if, which this is not clear, it is not a clear answer that PLA projects actually increase construction costs. That is by no means a settled question. But even if that were a settled question, PLAs are still good. Project labor agreements are still good. They're good for the workers, they're good for society. And, this freak doesn't think so.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think PLAs are just common sense, using the power of public funds to create public good.
Yeah.
I mean, there we go.
Yeah. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.